We would like to now take the moments to give the floor to you. So I would really encourage any questions, any comments, any discussion points from those who are with us virtually, from those who are with us also in the classroom. And then after that, I asked Professor Popovic to do the closing remarks, since he's actually in many ways the one responsible for bringing us all together here. So we look forward to that. But now we have plenty of time for questions, discussion, comments. It's all yours. So if you could raise your hand, either virtually or in real life, we can start. Don't be shy. And I may need the assistance of Elena to see here the hands, but normally I should see some sort of a hand if there's something. But please, who would like to go first? Earlier in the session, I saw there was a hand very early on. Now I don't see hands. So maybe, Elena, could you join me for a second to make sure I'm looking in the right place? Because I have two screens here. Can I see here?
Here.
Okay, that was a comment I think she made. Is that the only one? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
All right, and then if somebody raises their hand, I should see it here.
Yes.
Okay.
Show here. Right here.
It will come up in the chat.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I'll just keep the chat open. So excellent. So now I see here we had a comment posted from Gordana. But I don't think there was a question there.
It's not over, so I don't know where we're, yeah. Okay. Maybe as we are host today, someone from the classroom. Have you learned something new? I hope you did today. So, any questions?
Okay. Gordana did raise her hand. Okay, so Gordana, please go ahead. First of all, thank you for your comments. Gordana is a practitioner of cultural diplomacy here in Belgrad, and she mentioned in her comments we had a chance to meet at a number of ICD events. So Gordana, please turn on your microphone and feel free to go ahead.
Do you hear me, Mark? Hello? Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for this great performance and this conference that Union and Academy for Cultural Diplomacy prepared. And I'm really glad to see you in Serbia finally, and I hope that you will continue to come and to establish cooperation with Union University and Serbia as well. I established a non-governmental organization, Office for Cultural Diplomacy, in last year, so this is my topic as we discussed in Berlin on several occasions. My question for you as a director of Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, which is a worldwide organization, and I really would like to call all the students present at this conference to join to Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, because it's a very valuable organization, in depth involved in this issue. And my question is for you, how the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy and all institutions worldwide that you connect with, from Romania to US, look on the future development of cultural diplomacy in this pandemic issue, because my personal opinion is that hybrid forms of events and all other public, activities will continue in the long run down the road. And I think that we will not be back on the traditional ways of communication and cooperation. So what is the role of this kind of conferences in future development of cultural diplomacy as one of the maybe the most soft and most valuable acts of public diplomacy in general, not to mention all other political developments that we now have, all together with this shift of Facebook to Meta and all other cyber attacks that we are now faced with. So what is your opinion and opinion of the moderator of the conference as well, how to continue with cultural diplomacy as one of the biggest mechanism in connecting cultures, connecting states in interconnected world with all other, not only health problems that we are facing with. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Would you like to respond, or ladies first? Or?
No, please.
Yeah, okay. And if others would like from the panelists, feel free. But no, I think, Gordana, thank you for your question. And to be honest, this is actually nothing new for cultural diplomacy. If you look at the history and evolution of cultural diplomacy, it's always faced challenges, whether they be political challenges, economic challenges, other crises. And I think that's the creativity that has always been necessary with cultural diplomacy. Even if we look at culture, some of the most amazing artistic expressions have actually come from periods of oppression. As you look at all sorts of points of history around the world. So therefore, okay, we have COVID. That's a problem. It makes it difficult. We can't travel as easily. We can't do physical activities as easily. So we have to improvise. The ICD Academy, for about 1.5 years, I always make jokes with sleeping, in the sense the last major event we did was in the end of 2019. Okay, we weren't able to do events, but we continued and we actually grew. So we actually have more students now than before. We luckily had an online platform already there, developed with our university partner in Germany, Furtwagen University, that was relatively sophisticated already. So we just shifted virtually and we continued. Everything was going on schedule. The degrees were delivered as on time. Now we're very, very happy that the campus is back in action and now it's full of students. We have more students than before. Of course, that's better. So I think that would be my initial advice. There was a famous graffiti artist in Egypt, and he actually was very active before the Arab Spring, during and afterwards, Ganzir. And he, at a certain period in time, it was relatively difficult to be a graffiti artist. You had really this sort of military control of the entire country. And so he said, okay, if I can't do graffiti, and it was very political messages he did with the graffiti, if I can't do it on buildings, let me make t-shirts. And he started to make t-shirts with his art. And many who are actually there in Tahrir Square were also wearing his t-shirts. So just as one example, if my mother always says, when God closes a door, he opens a window. So I think that's the task for cultural diplomats today, look for the windows. And so I don't have really general advice, because as I said, cultural diplomacy does have to be specific. We have to say, okay, on this particular date in this particular country, whether we're dealing in a micro level with individuals living on the same street in the same city, or at a more macro level, country A, country B, one does need to have very specific studies there. But I'm happy to see, as we were having this dialogue, a flow of other questions. So the coffee has been drunken by our participants, and I think now we are awake, and we have many different comments. Before I take the next one, would one of the panelists like to say something on this question in terms of the opportunities for cultural diplomacy in this framework of the challenging COVID-19 environment? If so, I would say just go ahead. There's no need to raise a hand. If not,
maybe
please. Because
this time is also a time for some advantages, and the advantages is digitalization. So what happened is that all of us who wanted could enter in the most famous museums in the world during the time of COVID-19. We could saw movies on the fresh movies, the movies which are making new entrance. We could hear interviews with so many world intellectuals. So actually, we moved our world from real to virtual, and in all our spheres of our lives, including culture. So for cultural diplomacy, the COVID-19 is not only the time of challenges, but also some advantages.
Definitely. I would see it definitely the same way. I see there's a specific question posed for Danko Prokic. Can cultural diplomacy be a way to regulate relations between the citizens of Kosovo and their neighbors? Ambassador Prokic, can you please respond?
Sorry, I didn't hear. Sorry.
Oh, so the question,
what was the question?
Sure, I'll read the question again. Can cultural diplomacy be a way to regulate relations between the citizens of Kosovo and their neighbors?
Neighbors of Serbia, you mean?
Here it refers to their neighbors.
No, you know that we do not recognize the unilateral proclamation of Declaration of Independence of Kosovo. So treating Kosovo as a southern province of Serbia let's say implies that we treat Kosovo as a province, and of course we have a contact with population in Kosovo and Metohija through different channels, including the culture relations and health. Let's say in this pandemic environment, Serbia is helping the healthcare in the province of Kosovo and Metohija, well, through cultural diplomacy or medical or health. You know, as I said, the cultural diplomacy is a living process that adapts to the present existing circumstances. So maybe you have to get some information more about this from the current and active diplomats, since I'm in retirement for a couple of years, following, let's say, the international scene and the domestic scene. But that's it. As I said, the cultural diplomacy doesn't have boundaries. And since the Kosovo and Metohija is the province of Serbia, what is applied in the whole territory of Serbia, it is applied also in the territory in the southern province of Kosovo and Metohija, in the sphere of cultural diplomacy. Thank you.
Let me be bold and come back to you, Ambassador, with a question. And just, there was a great TV show back, I think it was in the 80s, called Columbo, a police investigator, and he would always kind of play dumb and ask very naive questions. So let me take that approach. As an outsider looking in, if you look at Rwanda, they were able to succeed more or less in terms of reconciliation. If you look at South Africa, they were relatively successful also in establishing a reconciliation. Unfortunately, the situation seems to be getting a little bit worse recently in both places. But my question really as a layperson looking in, what is the main dilemma with Serbia and Kosovo, and what can be done in the sense? For me, national borders are less important. There was a famous scholar, Benjamin Barber, with Cornell West at Princeton University, who came up with this thesis of interdependence. And they said for a long time, we were trapped in this box of nation states. Every nation state wanted to be independent. That was the end goal. They want to be independent and free, whether it's Latin American countries, African countries, or even the USA. And he said, freedom is great, independence is great. However, as soon as a country becomes independent, whether they like it or not, they must recognize we live in an interdependent world. And you can't actually do everything alone. If you want to make progress on something like COVID-19, if you want to make progress on something like environmental climate change, we need to work together. So therefore, it's less important this whole, okay, independence, this, or we were having conversations about Catalonia last night over dinner. But we're a team. We've got to play together. So in the spirit of teamwork, what could cultural diplomacy do concretely, do you think, as someone who's served as ambassador in multiple countries, to build bridges? And so I would say, let's leave the issue of citizenship, the issue of borders aside. But practically speaking, we've got, some of the team members of our soccer team in Kosovo, some of the members of our soccer team in Serbia. How can we have a unified team really playing together, moving in the same direction? Do you have any suggestions there, or also for others? But first of all, I'd love to hear from the ambassador.
All relations with Kosovo go through UNMIC. As you know, the Kosovo and Metohija, the province, unfortunately, it is as a protectorate. So all this goes through the UN and Resolution 1244, all relations with Kosovo and Metohija. Of course, we have a dialogue which is facilitated by the European Union, but this is on the different questions, etc. Not very much on cultural diplomacy and this interconnection. But as I said, we treat Kosovo and Metohija like a province of Serbia. That's it.
I would like to jump in.
Doesn't have too much with this subject, I doesn't have too much with the subject with the COVID diplomacy. Your question and cultural diplomacy. Sorry.
If I may, Miljan is talking. Can I?
Floor is yours. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So just briefly on this one. So we started actually discussing around, for me, sorry to say that, relatively unclear question regarding the Kosovo and Metohija, because it is, can cultural diplomacy be a way to regulate relations between the citizens of Kosovo and their neighbors? For me, it is relatively unclear in this context. I would like to address The another one posed by Andrea, she asks whether cultural diplomacy can help in terms of reducing vaccination hesitancy, or in, let's use that word, like in the title of my presentation, in combating opposite views regarding COVID-19 vaccination. So, and my colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Paunovic, has already replied, saying that sharing experience from those countries who achieved actually a very high COVID-19 vaccination rates could be useful, of course, and sharing their experience, positive results of that high vaccine uptake, COVID-19 vaccine uptake, etc. But still, it is pretty challenging issue. So recently, WHO country office in Serbia, supported by funds received through USAID, actually we've just launched the huge campaign aiming to decrease hesitancy towards the COVID-19 vaccination in Serbia. And it has actually 3 pillars. The first pillar is evidence generation. The second one is risk communication, and the third one is community engagement. So in order to employ cultural diplomacy, still you need to have really good evidence, generating evidence. So first step in this is rapid behavioral insight studies. Once you know what are the main concerns, the main reasons for hesitancy, then you can also apply a cultural diplomacy as well. So for instance, back in spring this year, in certain parts of Serbia that could be a little bit culturally different than the rest of Serbia, which is that is the part around the city town of Novi Pazar, Tutin. They had actually a very high vaccination hesitancy, and of course, as a result, very low vaccination rate over there. So we conducted a field visit over there. It could be considered as a cultural diplomacy, sitting together with the students of 3 universities existing over there, answering their questions, bringing different perspectives to maybe their cultural perspective of their own, and providing the more wide view and more wide perspective. So maybe it cannot be strictly considered cultural diplomacy, but also it may be considered as that, because WHO as an international UN organization have visited and spent 3 days actually in one area of Serbia, bringing the international point of view, bringing the arguments, the reasons, pro and con, and things like that. So it could have been seen actually as a cultural diplomacy, and it brought results, direct result of that field visit that we've conducted back in April in that particular area, Raška Oblast or Sandžak in Serbia. So in 10 days after the visit, we've noticed actually the increase in vaccination uptake over there. So it was not enough, but it was a real example how maybe not strictly defining cultural diplomacy would not be applied here, but still it seems like a cultural diplomacy to exchange experiences, to exchange different points of view and things like that. It brought results in the example that I've mentioned. Still, it is at local level, but the process is over from my side.
Excellent. Thank you very much for those responses. Other comments or responses to the question, which I think is relevant in the framework of COVID-19, practically speaking, what can we do? Just 2 suggestions I would offer from experience with conflict zones. I always find when there's a conflict either going on or a post-conflict, indirect cultural diplomacy is sometimes more effective than direct. And what I mean by that is an activity or a cultural diplomacy project which doesn't directly deal with the conflict. So something that's actually not about Kosovo or Serbia or national identities. something like soccer, where you get a group of people together to play on the same soccer team that happen to be maybe from Kosovo and from Serbia and maybe other countries. Or music. If you look at Daniel Barenboim, the very famous Argentinian conductor who also has an Israeli and a Palestinian passport, who created the East-West Divan Orchestra, which was a mixture of Israelis, Palestinians, and Arabs from all around the region, playing together at the highest level classical music, Beethoven and beyond, as a second example. So those are two practical ideas one could consider. Also, this is responding to another question, which we got from Leontina Gnek. How much can cultural diplomacy help with many conflicts between states caused by politics? And so again, in the framework of COVID-19, as is the topic for today, I'd be curious also further comments or questions or suggestions, maybe also from those from the region. Maybe we have also participants from Kosovo, from Serbia, and beyond. And I'm throwing that question to the audience, and let's just see what else we have. Yes, you just responded. Thank you very much to the issue. Can you share with us your opinion on the subject of opposing views on vaccination? Do you think that cultural diplomacy can help, and to what extent? As you rightly pointed out, Mr. Anchitz, yes, it can help in terms of education, information. That's definitely one of the first things that cultural diplomacy should be doing. And obviously in an objective way. There's arguments on both sides. Nobody knows for sure. I have, unfortunately, cases of people who are close to me. One of them is lying in the coma in the hospital right now in Berlin, a few days after getting the vaccine. We don't know why, but it wasn't a coincidence. We have a few other cases of individuals who are fully vaccinated and also got sick weeks and months later. So it's not a precise world. There are no perfect solutions. Every human being reacts differently. Therefore, I really think it is valid to have this discussion. Everyone must decide for themselves. So I'd be happy if there are other direct responses to that question. Let's see, we have, I think, two other questions. I will pose as well. And then actually, I'll pose one more question from here, and then let's see if there's responses. Cultural health diplomacy can promote vaccination by sharing positive experiences of the countries with high vaccination rates. But we must not forget that there are still a lot of countries where vaccines are not available. So the first is to make them available for all worldwide and to promote the vaccination at the same time. We can see that the reaches and the most developed are having the highest vaccination rates. Very important point, and I think this goes to the issue as well. Cultural diplomacy is fine, but of course we need to have justice. We need to have human rights. We need to have, in this case, vaccination. So to have an abstract theoretical conversation is okay, but it's not so relevant, as you point out, if there are really people in need. And this is relevant not only to the issue of vaccination, but as I mentioned, human rights, justice as well. We can have wonderful discussions about Israel and Palestine, and we can have great soccer games where they're playing on the same team, but if you still have everyday injustices, it's not going to lead to a solution. So of course, hand in hand, we need to bring the results that are necessary on whatever the issue is, as well as the cultural diplomacy. So you raise a very good point, not just to have debates and discussions theoretically, should we get the vaccine or shouldn't we? But in this case, I think there's a consensus in the world, the vaccine is good, the vaccine helps. Is it going to solve all problems? No. So we do need to make sure that people have access to the vaccine if they decide to take it. So I'd be happy to give this to my fellow panelists as well, any of these questions or comments, and also to those in the room. I see we have a question here. Excellent. So let's maybe take that first. And just a practical question, do we have a microphone, or how should he pose this question so that we can have the individuals here?
It would be good that you come here.
Okay. Then come to the podium, please. Yes. And if you could also then briefly introduce yourself too, so we know who you are, and then please make your comment or pose your question. No problem.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Nikola Matkovic. I'm the student of Union Law School here in Belgrade, 4th years of study. So I would first like to thank you, all of you, for giving this conference and on this rather unknown issue. I would describe this and this subject of cultural diplomacy. So I have two questions. So the first one is how to approach the idea of cultural diplomacy as the mechanism of solving these conflicts, not only here in the Western Balkans, but in the rest of the world. And can cultural diplomacy help to overcome problems in, for example, this vaccine problems with giving permissions, for example, to use, like, for example, Russian vaccine or Chinese vaccines in countries that has not been give permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To my fellow panelists, would someone like to respond first? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to respond to the last part of this question. So when it comes to the approval of vaccine products, COVID-19 vaccine products, WHO has its mechanism called emergency use listing and pre-qualification. So it is a predefined process, and there is precisely and strictly defined what kind of documentation, what kind of clinical trial results, what kind of studies should be submitted to WHO committee specialized for this issue in order to get WHO approval for using in reality the vaccine product. So speaking from the perspective of WHO, there's no doubt about that. The principles of recognizing and approving vaccines are the same. There is no any kind of discrimination, distinction, political influence, etc. When it comes also to other regulatory agencies, to national actually regulatory agencies, we might expect some political influence on that. But still, usually in these matters, in the background, there are usually the real facts. So for instance, WHO so far granted emergency use license only to, I think it is now 5 vaccine products, because they've, simple as that, they've submitted required documentation confirming the efficacy and the safety of vaccine products. On the other hand, we also, it is really, really hard in real life to avoid politics. On the other hand, for instance, just to show the example, in Serbia, for instance, there is a possibility for citizens to choose among 4 vaccine products. It is expected also soon to get the 5th one. So 2 of those are really recognized and approved by European Medical Agency, EMA or EMA, or whatever. It is Pfizer vaccine, Pfizer BioNTech, and AstraZeneca. So still the citizens vaccinated in Serbia with those 2 products, which are produced at the same production sites and everything, when they arrive to European Union, there is a kind of problem with reading the QR codes on their certificates. So it could be solved in a minute or in a day, but there is also always, unfortunately, political aspect of that, or political issues. Those are exactly the same vaccines with the serial lot number and everything, and could be compared, but for some reason it is kind of non-complementary reading mechanism of QR codes. So a lot of Serbian even students that are studying across Europe now during the previous months have reported to WHO that kind of problem, despite the fact that they have been vaccinated with the vaccine products approved by European Medical Agency. Still they're facing kind of problems with reading the certificates and things like that. So it is only a small example, but unfortunately, from time to time, we can always avoid all the political aspects, and cultural diplomacy, I think, might help, but the strong efforts are needed. Over.
I would also like to say a few words, Mr. Chair, if you allow, on that question.
The floor is yours.
We quite often, in fact, forget that cultural diplomacy is not only linked to the official diplomats, yeah? And I would speak from my own experience while working for WHO, and even more while working as an independent consultant, but through the contracts for WHO or UNEP or UNEC, for example, in Kosovo, as it was mentioned. So we don't discuss the issue of recognition, independence, and so on and so forth. They know quite well that I'm Serbian. We discuss technical medical issues. I do my best to connect people with similar histories, past, even studies, because we were one country some time ago. And to build up and to resolve these issues, for example, pollution has no borders. We can recognize border officially, not recognize border officially, but there are no borders to pollution. There are no borders to spreading the virus. There are no borders to spreading the knowledge, in fact. So if you start from that position, and I think we should mention the role of non-governmental, not governmental officials, but independent intellectuals with the positive attitudes, with the, who are sharing the same human values, that all human beings are the same. Again, to come back to this, what I was talking about. We are all the same, all the human beings, being from Kosovo with a footnote or not a footnote, with an asterisk on, without asterisk, from Serbia, either we are black or we are from Gaza and the others are from Israel, we are the same. So I think we shouldn't undermine in the cultural diplomacy, and I would take diplomacy which is not only taking the culture, but also scientific dialogue, exchange of expert opinions, and the role of the intellectuals who should really drive cooperation this way. And through this softening of the relationships in conflict zones, I think we should make a progress even now in pandemic, which is necessary. But I have extremely positive opinion, and then we had exchanges of participating of the participants on different meetings at the regional level, discussing these issues which are not having borders. And people tried to agree on some technical cooperations, on some positive steps, and we should use, really, we have the obligation as educated people to promote such values through cultural health diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As they say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. One of the disappointing things we saw from a cultural diplomacy point of view is that there was not more collaboration between Russia and China and the USA. Everyone was sort of doing their own thing when it came to the research. Of course, the great exception is the World Health Organization, but that was one opportunity. I wouldn't say missed opportunity. There obviously was some collaboration, but we could have done much more. And I think it would have accelerated the entire process. Serbia is a good example of that. Serbia worked with everyone. And I think Serbia reacted very quickly, and in that sense really served as a model for many countries in the world. And that I think you can see as a success story. But I wanted to just underline what you were saying there, also the role of non-governmental actors. One of my classmates in college at Columbia University was a famous singer. Lauryn Hill was her name. You may have heard of her from the Fugees. She's a generation or two before the audience in front of me, but still very famous, very gifted. And while she was still in college, like me, she also started a nonprofit organization called the Refugee Project. And Lauryn's way of looking at the world also influenced me in many ways. She said the main difference between human beings in the world is not race or ethnicity or nationality or gender or religion, it's access. Some people in the world have access to what they want and what they need. Some don't have access. And I would suggest, as we look at Kosovo or Serbia or Israel, Palestine, the vast array of issues and challenges that we're facing, such as COVID, that is actually the main issue, access. We have to make sure that we have access to the information, access to the discussion, to the debates about the issues, as well as, of course, access to the vaccine, etc. And I think there, yes, cultural diplomacy can help in enabling that access, whether it's political negotiations or grassroots organizations or individuals simply working together. 2 or 3 doctors from different countries saying, look, let's collaborate. Here's my notes. Here's what I found. What do you think? As has the World Health Organization has done on so many occasions. So just to underline, yes, non-governmental actors can play a big role. And sometimes they have to play a role when the governments aren't talking or the governments aren't collaborating. So a big opportunity. This responds to a question I just saw also from Vladan Stanojevic. Is cultural diplomacy sustainable in the conditions of COVID-19, having in mind the impediment to the movement of people? Yes. And I would say in the grand scheme of things, from my point of view, COVID is a very easy challenge. If you think of the challenges we've faced in the last century, world wars, epidemics, etc. Okay, COVID is there. Luckily, it's not as dangerous as some other viruses. We have to take it seriously. But to put it in perspective, of course, I think we can handle this. Cultural diplomacy can handle this. Cultural diplomacy can stay sustainable. And I'm hoping it's not going to be too long when we can have more of a normalization in our classrooms and our conferences. But I'm very optimistic there. My fellow panelists, or other questions? We still have time. And the idea of those who aren't with us writing is very effective, because then I can see it right away. I see we have another question in the room. Please come to the podium if you can. Introduce yourself, and we're looking forward to your question and your comments.
Hello everyone, my name is Philip. I study law at the Faculty of Union, and I want to ask two questions. One, you're a bit more political. How do you favor, or what is your opinion on the donation of vaccines that the Serbian government did a couple of months ago? And the second one is more about cultural diplomacy, about our southwestern neighbors. Every time there is a film festival, I think called Miradite Dobar Dan, there are incidents. So is there any way we can solve this issue, and maybe we can have like, is there a way for cultural diplomacy between Serbia and Albania? Because so far it hasn't worked as much as it should.
Thank you very much for your questions. I'd like to give my fellow panelists the first chance to respond. Two questions. First of all, what is your opinion on the idea, the Serbians' donation of vaccines? Secondly, to the southwestern neighbors, can cultural diplomacy do anything useful when it comes to Serbia and Albania? And if so, what? One example was given film festivals, but how can we effectively make progress on Serbia-Albanian relations in the framework of COVID-19 when it comes to cultural diplomacy? Who would like to respond first? On either of the questions or both of the questions?
I can try to provide some answer, but my perspective is pretty much different than the perspective of the average citizen of Serbia, because I'm WHO. So I would like to say that at this level, international level, there is actually very good collaboration in the context of response to COVID-19 between, in particular, Albania and Serbia. The colleagues from the National Institutes of Public Health of Albania in Tirana and the National Institute of Public Health Batut here in Belgrade, they actually exchange an important information, maybe not on a daily basis, but on a weekly, monthly basis. And WHO intermediates the process. Also, both sides know that we are here as WHO to support. So actually we are gathering and collecting needs, identifying the needs, also trying to identify where are the resources in the region, and if there are any possibilities to relocate, to reallocate some of the resources, and even in terms of human resources, it works. For instance, there was a announcement for a position, international fixed term, but temporary position for a consultant on COVID-19 vaccination. So we employed the citizen of Serbia, and he was very welcomed in Albania several times during the field visits over there, identifying the needs and things like that. So in the areas that are not strictly and very directly connected to the politics, things work actually. Things are working from my perspective. I don't know, for instance, what happens in the area of culture and art, but in the area of health, there is a pretty decent and good collaboration and information exchange between the, in particular, like mentioned, between Albania and Serbia. Over.
Excellent. Thank you for underlining that. I think the World Health Organization is maybe the best example of international collaboration when it came to that. So thank you. Other
Maybe
responses to one or both of the questions?
Maybe I will add something also on that, on these two questions. Regarding Albania, we have relatively good relations, and the only obstacle is the recognition of the Serbian province of Kosovo and Metohija by Albania. Albania is a neighboring country, which is very important for us. And with Albania, we are cooperating in these open doors of Western Balkans, which is also the, let's say, the tool of cultural diplomacy in a sense. We are showing to the other neighbors like Bosnia and Herzegovina, and generally in the region of Balkans, and showing to the European Union that we want to cooperate with our neighbors and to overcome existing problems, to improve our economic relations, cultural relations. So this all belongs to the cultural diplomacy in a way. And regarding the second question, donating of vaccines, I see it very positive, and it was followed by the positive publicity in Serbia and in neighboring countries, in the European Union, etc. So the medical doctors, they know much better about this, whether I think we had an excessive number maybe of vaccine shots. So also that was the reason we were donating, but not only this, the reason was to help to some countries in need of vaccines. I think that was the reason, main reason, but also at that moment when we were donating vaccines, we had excessive number of vaccines. But I heard that Poland a couple of days ago, they donated to Serbia 200,000 of vaccines of, I think, Moderna. I'm not so sure which manufacturer it is. So this is a normal, let's say, behavior in the world when relations between countries are normal, you know, to help with this medical, let's say, assistance, etc. Because Serbia was known during the history, I mean, helping, for instance, Asian countries, African countries with technical aid starting from 50s, especially in Asia and Africa. Of course, which brought to Serbia different benefits, because Serbia also having the good relations with these countries got a lot of opportunities for their construction companies in Africa and Asia. So, okay, that was not the reason Serbia was helping, but at the end, that was the result also. Thank you.
Yeah, I would also like to add something. And yes, completely, Mr. Ambassador is right. We are quite often forgetting that quite a number of countries is still not having a sufficient number of vaccine. And at that time, when we were donating more, it was even more critical. And if we had a vaccine which will expire, for example, in a month or two, and we see our pace of vaccination that it is not as quick as we assume that it would be, it is really human and normal to donate these vaccines to the countries which don't have the vaccines. And we shouldn't forget that there is a number of countries in Africa and Asia still without the access to vaccines. We should follow a bit what's going on worldwide and put in the wider context this. So I also see donation of vaccines, what Serbia did as a small country with the amounts that we could provide, that also much bigger countries, big producers should really, for the sake not only of cultural diplomacy, but of sharing main human values, should do and support other countries. Thank you.
Somehow I forgot to mention that aspect as well. So WHO has officially appreciated and acknowledged that action from Serbia. As Elizabeth just said, it was even during the time when the shortage of vaccine at the global market was even much more critical than it is now. And would like to also add something that is not that known, like the fact that Serbia donated vaccines to neighboring countries. Serbia has also donated a certain amount of vaccines to some African countries as well. And it is absolutely fully in line with WHO policies, solidarity principles, and all the values of United Nations. Over.
Thank you very much for those responses. I would fully agree with each of the panelists, and definitely actions speak louder than words. So I would say definitely if there is an opportunity, such as the opportunity that Serbia had and also has to donate vaccines, of course, they should do that. You can consider it soft diplomacy. You can consider it a variation even of cultural diplomacy, but in this case, really direct diplomacy. And that's always the case as you look at also developing countries. If there's a need for a hospital and you can do it, build a hospital. If there's a need for a school and you can do it, build a school. Those actions, of course, are going to matter much more for those individuals than a jazz concert or an exchange program, even though those are, of course, very important. And if you can do both, even better. So I would say whenever such an opportunity arrives, definitely react. In this case, Serbia is a small country, but it was very wise and early on getting a lot of vaccine and put it in a very strong position. So I think that was an excellent opportunity, which Serbia reacted perfectly. And I would say let's continue that if other such opportunities arise. To the second question, I'll maybe refrain from answering because I'm not Serbian, I'm also not Albanian. I would say the Serbians and Albanians know better than I. But this would be maybe an invitation to Gordana and the Office for Cultural Diplomacy here in Belgrade. If you see opportunities or also our university partner, Union University, let us know. I always say for engaging in countries where we don't have expertise, I always require a local partner. And I would prefer that you come to me and say, Mark, this is what we think is useful, or an Albanian counterpart to do the same. So therefore, just an open invitation for anyone who's listening, in case you would like to engage and would like the support of the ICD, let us know. It sounds like it's an easier example in those relations than maybe other relations between Serbia and Albania, and we'd be happy to support any initiatives or even to promote any initiatives. Ideally, you can even do it yourself and let us know. We can advertise it on our website, Facebook, to try to get increased support for you. So excellent. But we're happy to continue. Any other questions or comments from anyone in the room or also with us virtually? And those virtually, I would say just come on the air and open up your microphone, or if you prefer to write it, you can do that as well. And in the room, just raise your hand as always. Because if there aren't additional questions, then I would suggest we invite Professor Popovic to join us, but I want to give you one more chance before I do so. Okay, so in that case, let me take the opportunity just to introduce to you a very close friend and partner of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy. I'm grateful to say for many years, His Excellency Judge and Professor Dragoljub Popovic. We got to know him at the time. He was a judge at the European Court of Human Rights. He is a professor. He's a former ambassador, someone who has experienced cultural diplomacy, issues of justice, issues of human rights on both sides of the borders, from within Serbia and abroad, even though he's a local, having been born in Belgrade. And I'm proud to say he's also been a very active member of the advisory board of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy for many years. And he is the one I can give single-handed responsibility to the fact that I'm here, that the ICD also has a small office now in Belgrade. And we're paving the way, as I said, for I think a very, very exciting partnership also with the university. So if you could please give a warm applause for Judge Popovic.
Well, you explained my role. Let me mention once again that there is a small unit. It has been functioning, it has been operating for almost half a year now within the Law School of Union University under the auspices of the Academy for Cultural Diplomacy. And it is called International Law Counseling, with the abbreviation ILC. A member of the faculty that is Jovana Popovic, is in charge, and I'm just being helpful with the ILC. And I'm glad that we could give our small contribution to this event, and I do hope this is the beginning of a fruitful cooperation between the Academy and the law school, the University School of Law. As to the topic, I cannot contribute much because it's been a long time that I'm no more active in the diplomatic service, and I have no idea about medicine except being patient from time to time. And it has many details have been displayed, and I should say with fairness, because for instance, if we consider Serbia as the hosting country of this event, we could realize the success and the failure in certain aspects of our country, and I think it is worth noting. As to the future cooperation between the two institutions, I hope that we'll make progress and that this is only a beginning. And let me reiterate what Mark said, and I very much liked that statement. Cultural diplomacy cannot change the world, but we can contribute at least to improve it, to improve the world a little bit. And the motto that Mark put forward was, to which I subscribe, fully subscribe, is let's make it more difficult for the extremists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Popovic. I would like to give the concluding words to our host today, Professor Violeta Pesarevic.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all our distinguished panelists and speakers, the audience here at the Union University Law School Belgrade, and the audience online for joining us today, for devoting your time for this very interesting topic. I'm sure that our students have learned a lot new things today, and they will benefit a lot from that. And as I'm also sure that cultural diplomacy can really support this global battle against the COVID-19. And as we have learned today, there are several mechanisms to achieve today. I also hope that we will continue our cooperation with the Academic for Cultural Diplomacy in different ways. And I also hope to see not only you, Mark, and your two colleagues, but also your students here in Belgrade. Thank you very much.
So thank you once again to all, and we very much enjoyed. I think we all benefited from this discussion and debate in many ways, and we look forward to the next opportunity. So to all of those who are joining us virtually, all the best, and we look forward to the next cooperation. Thank you.